Hey everybody, I'm Hayes Davis. I'm co-founder and CEO here at Gradient Works, and wanted to welcome Clayton here from Center, who is somebody who's been a Gradient Works customer and has a lot of really interesting things to share around how they do things at Center as it relates to targeting accounts, doing outbound to accounts, and ultimately driving pipeline. So excited to have a conversation about that today. So Clayton, love to get an intro to you and your role, and then about Center in general, the kind of level set as we talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of how you all tackle outbound and some of these other things to drive account coverage.
Absolutely. Yeah. Hey, it's great to be chatting with you today. My name is Clayton Blueher. I'm the Director of Business Development over here at Center. I have been with Center since the very beginning, was actually the first account executive on the
Awesome.
team and kind of first formal go-to-market hire. So
Mhm.
I have a lot of context for how we've gone from 0 clients to over 1,000 now and where we are against that evolution and what that's looked like the pretty much the whole time. So really excited to get into the whole conversation.
Nice. So I assume that all of that growth is directly attributable to you as the first go-to-market hire. Is that right?
Not all of it, no. We're the
Well,
first, we can attribute the first couple clients, but that's
okay.
about it. The rest
Fair
is
enough.
not.
Well, so I'd like to, tell me a little bit more about Center, right? I think, a lot of these things are context specific. So tell me just a little bit more about the business, what you all do, and specifically how you think about the market and segmenting the market and thinking about where you're directing your activities as you're trying to grow.
Yeah, it's a great place to start. Like you said, every business and their go-to-market is super context specific to what the product is, what markets you're serving. Center is a really interesting one. We are a completely new approach to expense reports and corporate card processing. And most recently, we also released our travel set of functionality and features as well. So, yeah, we're really excited to be delivering what we think of as the next generation of travel and expense management and corporate card solutions. And it's sort of this natural evolution of this business process in particular. Way back in the day, it was just paper expense reports. I mean, most accounting processes were just paper. And then came along the first version of on-prem turned SaaS tools that really took that. And what I think of in like layman's terms is just like digitized the expense report. They just didn't really change the business process much. Instead of writing it on a piece of paper, you could submit your expense report through, a website or an app.
Sure. Yeah.
And now what we've done is we're using modern architecture, real-time data to just make the process all around much easier for companies. And the primary part of the value prop is time savings. You save a ton of time by adopting a new business process around expense reporting, corporate cards, and travel booking and management. So with that, back to the market, the go-to-market, we are it's a blessing and a curse. We work with a ton of different industries and company sizes. I say it's a blessing because we have a huge TAM, but it's a curse because go to market is pretty challenging when it comes to where should we put our energy and our focus, because there are so many different areas that we can prioritize and focus on and earn business. So that's a little bit of context about us.
Yeah, you put it exactly, I think, the way I would have put it based on my understanding of your business. We talk to a lot of folks who have these, fairly horizontal markets that are going after, especially software, that's in that uh, expense management or security or legal tech or things like that drive important processes across so many different kinds of companies, right? That yes, you've got this amazing market to go after, which is awesome, but then you have to figure out how do you find the areas that you really want to focus in, because you could hire, I would imagine, thousands of reps and still not even come close to covering every potential account that you could work with. And so
Yeah.
um, well, tell me a little bit about how you start to solve that problem. So how do you all think about that? I assume there's probably some work that you do from ICP definition all the way down to sort of the day to day that you ask reps to focus on. So help me understand some of that.
Yeah. So I'll explain or I'll answer that with sort of an explanation of the evolution of our processes
Mhm.
over time. And I think it speaks to the broader market of selling SaaS in general as well, which was back when we started go to market 3.5 years ago now. We were able to get a lot of business by just doing kind of a volume approach, a volume play with
Yeah.
a pretty generic and blanketed value proposition or kind of pain forward messaging or value forward messaging, just around the fact that, hey, this is a new approach to this business process. Here's the pains that we solve, and we could be really broad and
Mhm.
cast a super wide net. We still do some of that, which I'm happy to get further into to kind of sustain our pipeline build in some ways. But over the course of time, as we learn more and more about specific areas that we do really win really well, which are a lot of them, again, back to the blessing and the curse,
Right.
we've had to become a lot more specific with the detailed or the finer details of exactly how clients will be using our solution and what pains we'll be solving for them down to their specific operating models. And that's what I'm finding is probably the best way to actually get people interested and engaged with you, engaged with your brand, is when it's extremely relevant and timely to them. And one of the key parts about that is it has to be in their language and the way that they think. So we've recently and are kind of ongoing in this process right now, which we can expand on further, but we're trying to learn a lot more about very down to a very detailed level, which we'll talk more about market map cluster, how we're using micro segments is what we call them internally. But we're spending a lot of time really understanding kind of the voice of the specific customer that we're serving, the way that they think, the way that they talk about their operating models, and trying to train everybody on the floor on the go to market side to understand those things about those specific companies. So that way we can be much more tailored and specific to them versus just kind of this broad volume outreach.
Right. And I think you hit something that it's a little bit of a soapbox for me, which is, you see a lot of folks on LinkedIn and elsewhere talking about the value of personalization when it comes to outbound messaging and things like that. But I think personalization doesn't matter at all, really. What matters is relevance. Is it I don't care that you looked on LinkedIn and saw that I went to NC State and go Wolfpack. That
Yeah.
doesn't help me, right? What matters is you can speak my language. You know the things that I need to think about in my persona, my role within the industry and kind of accounts and companies like mine, the problems that I'm actually dealing with. And so I think that gets into where you actually get an executive's attention or somebody who's above the line, like really getting them to think about a problem isn't that you just looked up a fact about them. It's that the space that they're working in and can kind of echo back something that they may have. I always think of it as like you've got if you're thinking about the inbox that you're hitting or something like that, you want your email to be pointing out a problem that's like in an email like two down below from an internal team member, right? Like you really want to have
Yeah.
it be like super relevant like that. So um, that's so I'd love to hear that you're doing this, and I love this idea of micro segments, right? And that's something that you know we talked about. We talked about that usage of that term a lot internally, actually recently, and we're actually starting to shift the way we talk about market map from clusters to micro segments because I think it's such a good
Mhm.
term to think about. So I owe that to you. Thank you very much. But tell me what you mean by that a little bit. Like, irrespective of market map, we'll come back to that in a second. But like, what does that mean to you when you think about a micro segment or something? Because I think it's such an interesting term, especially for outbound.
Yeah. So I know one of the uh, I'll kind of use an example to get into it because I know we were going to talk about this example anyways. But the way I think about this is a slightly technical explanation, but for those people out there that know NAICS codes, and I'll kind of try to pair
Yeah.
it back to layman's terms as well. But basically, companies have categorizations that already get like go from a high level to very specific when they're structuring their businesses, and they kind of have to opt into saying, "This is who we are. This is how we operate. This is the type of company that we are." And that goes all the way from like a broad level, which could just be like healthcare, right? And then down to, okay, what specifically do you do within healthcare? And in the example that I have today to share with you is the senior living communities, right? So for all intents and purposes, for like the NEICS codes, which is an industry, North American industry classification system, they would basically say we're a healthcare company, but then you add more numbers onto your NEICS code, and then it all of a sudden tells you, okay, we're a senior living facility. And so that's, I think, what we're referring to when we're talking about micro segments internally is we have these broad segments that we know internally that we win in. Some examples beyond healthcare are like construction, aka field services teams that are working on physical labor jobs, manufacturing companies, professional services, right? But those are so broad that when you just say that, it's like, okay, what do you mean by that? Let's get more specific. So the micro segment actually gets down into the operating model of the very specific company and what we're talking about, using their voice, using the words that they use to talk about their business and understanding those things deeply so that way we can connect with them in that way.
Well, so since you brought up the senior living communities in Market Map that we identified as part of that product, let me set the table just a little bit for the tech behind that, and then I want to hear the story of what you all saw there and how you tackled it. But just really quickly, for anybody who's listening who's not familiar with the Great Works Market Map approach. What we're doing there is that we have a process that takes all the prospects in your CRM and goes and analyzes their publicly available web presence, their how they talk about the products and services they offer, how they talk about their business, and using a large language model actually condenses that down into finding really kind of key similarities across that, right? So you end up with two things that come out of that. One is being able to find accounts that are very, very similar to your customers. So ones that are actually super close, if you think about it, that describe themselves very similarly to customers you've had success with. But as part of building that process, you also can find sets of accounts that are extremely similar to each other in terms of how they talk about their business, what they offer, what they do. And one of the things that when we ran this market map process for Center, one of the things we found was a pretty good size, but very tightly knit cluster around senior living communities. Lots of accounts that operate very similarly, and so I'll let Clayton pick up the story from there. Two questions for you, Clayton. First, maybe, we identified a lot of these clusters like across the board. So what led you to that particular cluster as a starting point? And then talk about the play that you executed. What did you do from there? So give us kind of an overview of how that worked.
Yeah. So once we received the market map cluster data from your team, we ran, I believe, all of our accounts, which we have a lot of accounts in our database. We built a big one
Yep.
through there. What we did is our first step was actually to look into, by this categorization, these micro segments, this market map cluster, where do we have the biggest clusters and the most successful areas within our business from a current client standpoint.
Sure.
And then we correlated that to how many prospective accounts do we have in that segment as well, in that micro segment as well. And then we put another lens on it, which was specific to our business, which was we're currently looking to increase our overall average deal size. And so we wanted to start to look at areas where we had those previous two factors, current clients, a lot of prospective client accounts, but then also achieves the deal sizes that we're looking to do. And then there's probably a fourth that I would layer onto that as well. It has to be a unique and compelling enough use case that we can craft messaging and actually go put that email in their inbox. I love what you said. That talks about a problem that might be a couple of emails below in their own words. And so we
Okay.
need something to be have enough specificity to that. But that was our decision making process. And I'll add one more point here, which is that this has been extremely helpful for us as we've released our travel functionality and feature set as well, because that changes our ICP a little bit from our core expense side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very helpful where senior living communities, facilities may have some travel use cases, but not always. And so as we shift our focus to trying to win more and more travel related companies as well, it's
Mm-hmm.
been really helpful for us to be able to go and say, okay, what are those segments that are currently traveling that we know. We can see it on the closed one information, or I should say that customer notes
Mhm.
about them, and then actually go build, prospective client lists in that way as well. So those are two different ways that we're using it there, and that's our selection process.
Yeah, I love that too. Like especially right now, a lot of folks are in planning season, right? And so the perpetual challenge in planning when you're trying to think about how we refine our ICP or how we think about the how we're going to allocate out accounts to reps is always this tension a little bit between yesterday's weather, like let's look at where we've had success previously and what might be new and strategic for us, whether it's a new
Yeah.
product offering or like a strategic goal to move up market, have higher ASPs. In your case, you've got elements of both of those things to
Mhm.
consider, and so I think that there is an element of like subjectivity that you need to apply to that based on your strategy. You can't just take the metrics from the last 2 years and just say, okay, well, we're going to apply that forward because there's probably strategic changes you want to make. But you said something really interesting was the use cases, and that's I think core to relevance, right? And so when you think about something like you do that initial cut of data and you say, okay, interesting, senior living communities, we've got some customers there, there's a fair number of prospective prospects there, maybe that's a candidate. How do you actually get to that point of like, okay, we understand these use cases, and then I'm also interested, how do you take that and arm the reps with the information about that?
So when it came down to actually understanding the use cases, it was a collaboration between the account executive teams that sold a lot of our senior living community deals and the current account management teams that are kind of running the accounts on an ongoing basis and running the QBRs with the executive leaders at these facilities and so forth. And the other pillar was just like notes that we've captured throughout the
Sure.
entire customer journey process with them, and we talked to all those different roles across probably 15 different of the clients that we have or so, 15, 20, just to try to draw
Mhm.
as much trend correlation as possible amongst the use cases. And it's just really interesting because you learn, so like when it comes to our product and our space, pretty much every company out there, with some respect to this not applying to some companies, like pretty much every company out there can use a corporate card and buy stuff for their business, right? And so it's such a broad use case that we have to find out like what are literally the things you're spending on and the things that you care about when it comes to actually coding those expenses or categorizing them. How is your accounting structure set up for the type of business that you're operating down to those detailed levels? So that way that really informs the messaging that we craft. Like I'll give you an example with the senior living facilities. They do a lot of what we call P card spend, purchasing card spend, and a lot of that has to do with this. Will probably be no surprise as I talk through it, but like maintenance expenses, supplies for the facilities. They will have certain roles at these companies that like go between the different facilities and make sure that they're in good shape or whatever it
Mhm.
might be. And there's just all this various corporate card spending that comes along with that, right? And so we were able to understand, again, in collaboration with our internal resources, how do these companies talk about that, think about that, and how can we document those exact things that they're actually purchasing and needing to process through, expense management system. We then took that information and turned it into essentially product marketing, if you will, where it's how are we speaking about that? How should you go speak to these companies about that? And then enabled our BDR and our account executive teams to go source business, and then did all the sort of normal things like leveraging a sales engagement tool to send emails, LinkedIn messages, calls, and this is just, and then we're going to obviously layer in a lot other things from like the digital marketing side of things to our micro segments over time. We even actually ended up going to a senior living event out in Georgia and met with a lot of the kind of operators of these businesses because we just found that like we're so specific, we're winning a bunch of deals here, we're
Mhm.
opening a bunch of pipeline here that we should really double down, and it happened really quick. But without being able to identify these accounts, we wouldn't have been able to produce the results that we did so quickly.
Right. I mean, that's so awesome. And I think what you're describing, quite honestly, is I think that's the future of how sales teams need to operate. It's a combined effort right? Across, everybody talks about alignment, et cetera, right? But like the reality of go to market today is hyper relevance and coordinated efforts across product and product marketing, actual like customer success use cases, being able to bring those to bear, sales enablement, and then bringing in the marketing kind of air cover side of it, right? This
Mm.
is a whole combined effort to go target a profitable segment like that. And I think that's awesome because I think so many companies they say like, oh cool, well we closed a couple of new deals like in this group, let's just go, all the reps suddenly are like, hey, get some of those in my book, right? So I can go
Yeah,
just talk
exactly.
to those. um, Quick anecdote on my end, a company that I used to work for, uh, they had a couple of reps close a couple of zoos one time, right? And then suddenly all the reps wanted all the zoos, right? And it turned out that it was like those were just a couple of flukes, right? And it didn't really lead to anything. And so I think that the being able to see, analyze, and then go act on that is super important, and do it in a concerted
Mm.
way. Um, and so and so that's really awesome, that description of that. Anything you can share like metrics wise, or anything that came out of kind of that initial focus? If not, that's okay. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what metrics I'm allowed to publicly
Okay.
share around it or not, but what I will just say is that in a very short period of time, by having a specific focus on this, we were able to produce, you know, probably 3, 4x results of some other plays that our teams run. And I think it really did come down to the specifics and the relevance in which we're bringing in the messaging back to the client. The way I
Right.
like to describe it is it's almost like the voice of the customer, the voice of the prospective customer. I
Mhm.
think with this micro segment effort, we nailed it because we had enough we had enough of an understanding of, again, the way that they think about their businesses, that we're
Mhm.
able to just go be so specific. And I believe that, exactly as you're saying, is the future across the
Mhm.
board of how you need to target companies. And it proved to be such a successful result that this will be, going forward, the micro segment strategy is going to be like a core pillar of our go to market next year.
That's super exciting. That's awesome to hear. Well, so I want to, one of the things that's kind of implicit in a lot of what you're saying is it's one thing to identify these, it's another to actually go execute and operationalize that. And so, you
Mhm.
all are, you all use the dynamic books kind of approach to how you allocate out accounts and that sort of thing. So, um, one of the things I'm curious about here is we think about dynamic books kind of moving from this world where you've segmented everything, once a year with a carve, and you hand out like a static patch to reps, and like moving towards this model where, hey, we found an opportunity, let's dynamically allocate accounts out to reps and make sure we can run those plays. Our experience helping a lot of companies adopt dynamic books and building a platform to do that is that there's a set of questions that you have to think about there, which you don't always have to think about as much uh, with the kind of static plays, and it's thinking about rep capacity and how you manage that over time. So I've had a bunch of conversations lately because it's kind of that season. But everybody always wants to know, how do you think about, and do you have a magic formula for how many accounts a rep should have in their name
Mm.
at any given point in time? And so everybody's got a slightly different answer to this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because that rep capacity question is a huge question for everybody, whether they're doing static patches right now or whether they're doing the dynamic books model. So when you think about that, kind of shifting gears to just sort of more general operationalization, how do you think about that for your reps and your team?
Yeah. So it's an interesting one for us because if I were to be starting centers go to market from the ground up
Mhm.
again, I would not have done what we did. Which
Okay.
I'll answer your question by
Yeah.
telling our story, and then I'll kind of back it into like what we're
Sure.
up to
Yeah.
right now in terms of figuring out rep capacity. When
Mhm.
we first started trying to book clients, we just sent a ton of cold emails
Yep.
and we didn't know any better. And we just, basically what ended up happening is it worked. And
Mhm.
so we, over probably a period of a year or two, got way too ingrained and built habits around being too volume based of an
Yep.
organization. and basically using rep capacity to just do the spray and pray approach,
Yeah.
right? And that I think was a huge mistake because we should have been a lot more thoughtful about where the market was going in terms of how you actually do get results from prospecting, right? Which is what we're
Mm.
talking about, the relevancy. The other thing we haven't talked about, but is key to our approach, and I think a lot of companies right now that are forward thinking is the timeliness. So basically, finding accounts out there that have signals, whether
Mhm.
that's they're signaling that they're showing that they're researching the problem that you
Mhm.
solve, or they start engaging with your company in particular. Those are kind
Yeah.
of the two signals I think about. And so I would have, going back and starting from the beginning, I would have structured it a lot more that way. And then I think for the rep capacity, just kind of answering, where we're at now is we're really trying to go towards this approach where people are working a lot less accounts and the right amount of accounts.
Yeah.
Not too little, not too much. You can process through all of them. You can return accounts in an adequate way and you get the new ones. Dynamic Book has been really, really helpful for us this year because we were able to use it to the first thing we accomplished was we didn't really worry about rep capacity, transparently to start with.
Yeah.
That's not what we were solving for. We were solving for even distribution of pipeline.
Yep.
So that was the first thing that we just needed to solve for across the board. Now we're at a place where we're solving for how do we make each rep as effective and efficient as possible with Dynamic Book. And our approach to figuring out rep capacity is we actually have a lot of our team is still doing kind of our normal approach, which is too many accounts.
Mhm.
They do
Sure.
have sort of focuses and targets that they prioritize within that.
Mhm.
Microsegments being one of them, accounts with signals being another, with a mix of fit score and so forth that Dynamic Book helps us out with.
Right.
And we actually started what we're referring to as an internal pilot where we have a few BDRs we've reduced their book size, the amount of accounts that they own significantly. And we are actually using a quarter to try to figure out what is the right capacity. So our approach to figuring out capacity is we've done a lot of research of, the formulas and so forth, but we're actually trying to be results driven from it and just say, we think this is the right amount of accounts, but let's give you a quarter to go see if it is. Can you actually work these accounts adequately? Is it too overwhelming for you? Are you missing opportunities on some? Did we structure the segments within their books in the right way, et cetera? So that's our approach, is really trialing, but we have the luxury of having a model that's working, that is a mix of volume and target, while being able to pilot a more targeted model as well.
Yeah. I love that too. I think your whole team is just really forward looking in that regard. I think a lot of folks are kind of afraid to run pilots like that and run these types of tests, right? And so they sort of get stuck in the status quo. And I think deploying that with the team, really monitoring that is going to help you answer that question for your business, because every business is a little bit different. There's probably some rules of thumb out there based on kind of whether you're targeting SMB, enterprise, that sort of thing. But I think that's an awesome way to approach that. The the last thing I wanted to talk about, which again is just kind of getting into like the tactics here, is you mentioned one of the core tenets of dynamic books is the ability to disposition accounts and return them and
Mhm.
create. I essentially declare, hey, I've got more capacity, and then new accounts can flow to that rep. Um, and so one of the kind of core processes that runs there is a distribution that you do on an ongoing basis to ensure that reps get topped off. But I think about, there's usually that kind of core process, but then there's the plays that you want to run that you've identified and say like, hey, I want some reps to be able to take on, these accounts because we're going to run this specific play. So how do you think about balancing that? You alluded to it a little bit, but I'd love you to dive in a little further. How do you balance the sort of set of accounts you're running a play against, versus maybe sort of a core set of accounts that you're just always trying to cover?
Mhm.
And how do you think about that, especially in a dynamic books process? We're getting a little into the details on executing this, but I think it's super relevant for folks who are thinking about these problems right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So another big learning that we had this, and again, this is going to get a little bit into the weeds of the dynamic book itself, but
Yeah,
very relevant to those people who are navigating this is when
yeah,
we first started, there's this part of a dynamic book that's called, I think this is right, it's a segment, right?
yep,
Within the
mhm,
action. So not to be confused with the microsegments we're talking
Right.
about. This is actual.
Overusing that term a little bit, but
Yeah,
yes.
exactly, exactly. But a segment is essentially you're able to define against a. Oh, so let's say you have like 100 accounts that you want a rep to own. You can take within those 100 accounts and say 25 are going to look like this, 25 are going to look like this, and so forth. And at the beginning of the year, we didn't really, I don't think, use segments, maybe one or two different ones. But we just kind of bundled together like here's fit score and timing score and these kind of things that are going to be the right accounts for you to work. What ended up happening is we found that um, there were some accounts that just shouldn't have been being worked, but weren't being prioritized because they were getting all bundled into like this one segment.
Right.
And so we then evolved, and now we do these kind of more detailed, maybe too many segments, which
Sure.
we're working on solving as well. But we do a lot of different segments, and that's our approach to this to get them to kind of work the accounts that might be. Just give an example, like let's say there's accounts that are completely that seem that like they're not in market and they're not aware of our brand at all, right? There's no intent signals. They haven't engaged with any of the things that we've been sending them, but they're really good fits. We still want to obviously prospect those accounts. And so we built a segment for those. Hey, here's these kind of cold accounts that we want you to go after and just try to warm up, try to get them to engage, try to get them to go to our website, maybe join a webinar, things like that. And then, hey, here's this other segment, which are these accounts that are like closed lost as an example, people that have evaluated center before that didn't move forward due to timing. There's another segment that is your ones that are showing like they're in market and we need to go make them aware of our brand in particular while they're in market shopping for a solution. So segments have been the way to do it, and we've been playing around with the different sizing of the segments. So a certain one, like I'll use the closed lost, for example, or closed not one, as some companies refer to it as. We tried to pull it down to a really small amount because we think those should be worked very diligently and thoughtfully. Whereas the just completely cold accounts is like a much larger segment because we want to provide a little bit more volume and air cover there through reps, not just marketing.
Um, Again, I think it's a really good way of thinking about that. One of the things I think Dynamic Books does give you, especially when you get into this segmentation inside the book, is pretty like fine grained. Maybe sometimes you can get too fine grained with it because you can do too much,
Yeah.
but like it gives you the ability to kind of create this blend across the book of the kinds of accounts that you want reps to focus on, and it gives you the ability to tune that over time. So, like you said, some subset can be ones you're running plays against. Another subset can be closed lost, and those are all great like candidates for these types of book categories or segmentations. So, well, we're just about out of time here. I'd love to wrap this up with just your, put on your forecasting and prediction hat, I guess. I don't know if you've got a crystal ball for what you think kind of things are going to look like in 24, but I'd love to hear how you all are thinking about tackling 24 and some of the things that you're focused on in the next year. What are some big initiatives for you all, and how are you thinking about taking the lessons learned in 23 into 24?
Yeah. So I think probably not unique to us. I think every company still in the environment and everything that has been going on economy wise and United States in particular
Mhm.
and beyond. There's still that feeling of trying to just make the most out of what you have and operate as efficiently as possible. And so when I think about 2024 and our what we're really focused on from a go-to-market perspective in particular is efficiency and making the most out of what we currently have in place for our go to market. And I think the next thing that I'll add is just on the more like kind of technical side of that, how we're going to go about that is really refining our execution of exactly what we've been talking about in this discussion is getting way better at focusing on the right accounts at the right time in their voice. And we think that's going to be the formula to help us be as efficient as possible through 2024.
Well, I can't say anything to wrap up better than that. So, Clayton, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I love the way you all are tackling these problems at Center. I think it's really forward thinking, and the results speak for themselves. So, thanks so much for walking us through it.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks for having me, Hayes.
All right.